Episode 248 of the Aggressive Progressive Podcast. Is Trump getting worse? Let's start the show.
We are now the defenders of the stronghold of democracy and of equal opportunity.
You and I, as citizens, have the obligation to shape the debates of our time, not only with the votes we cast, but with the voices we lift.
The people are looking for honest answers, not easy answers.
The very word secrecy is repugnant.
Clear leadership.
And we are, as a people,
not false claims and evasiveness and politics as usual.
Opposed to secret society.
But ours was a nation of the ballot, not the bullet.
And a secret procedure.
As a people, we cannot afford to let any group of citizens or any individual citizen live or labor under conditions which are injurious to the commonwealth.
Black, white, Latino, Asian, Native American, young, old, gay, straight, men, women, folks with disabilities, all pledging allegiance under the same proud flag to this big, bold country that we love. That's what I see. That's the America I know.
Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America.
Welcome to the Aggressive Progressive Podcast. I am your host, Chris Hahn. Thank you for liking, rating, reviewing, and telling your friends about the podcast. I got a great show for you tonight. A guest. Haven't had a guest in a while on the pod. I got Jill WIne-Banks joining me. You know Jill. She, I'll give her a formal introduction later, but she was a Watergate prosecutor. You see her on MSNBC all the time, and she is one of the co-hosts of Sisters in Law. But first, I think one of the signs that you're losing it is that when you give a speech in a landlocked state like Nevada, you start talking about shark attacks. You try to make some weird connection to global warming by saying that, well, they're making them build battery-powered boats that will sink because the batteries are so heavy, right? I mean, meanwhile, we have boats that you can put cars on, land helicopters on, land jet fighters on. But, you know, you put a battery in it, replacing the engine, by the way, which is also heavy, and it's going to sink because the technology of boats hasn't advanced to the point where you could put a battery in it without it capsizing. By the way, 10 feet from sharks. This is the analogy that the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, the current Republican nominee for president, was trying to make over the weekend in Nevada when his teleprompter, I guess, malfunctioned. I believe he had a teleprompter malfunction and he was winging it because, you know, he grew up in Manhattan near Broadway. And you know the old saying, smile and keep moving. When you don't know what you're doing, just smile and keep moving. So he tried to tell the story of how he spoke to a boat manufacturer who said to him, sir, by the way, which is always the first clue that he's making something up when they call him sir. I don't know who you call sir unless you don't know who they are. And when you're the former president of the United States, I think everybody knows who you are, right? They might call you Mr. Trump or Mr. President, Mr. Former President, which is more accurate, but, you know, you get to keep the title. So Mr. President, I think is what they would say to you. I don't think they'd say sir. And I'm wondering, like, when, you know, over the last couple of months when he's been in court and then, you know, spending his time not in court, golfing or, meeting with people who buy his memes or what do you call them? Non-functional tokens, NFTs. I don't know when he had time to go to a boat manufacturer who was trying to build electric boats, which we, by the way, already have. The problem with electric boats is not the problem with them sinking. The problem with the electric boat right now is getting a battery that'll last long enough. That's the issue with electric boats. We have electric boats. We've had electric boats for a long time. It's not a new thing. It's the battery power that is the issue, and how do you get the battery to last long enough? But why you would bring up the topic of getting eaten by sharks in Nevada is just beyond me. I mean, it's almost as absurd as the guy that's the head of the Republican Party meeting with his probation officer today. Think about that for his pre-sentencing meeting with his probation officer, who will then write a sentencing report for the judge. The Department of Probation in New York City will, write this report to determine, what kind of sentence he should have. Is he showing remorse? Is he a threat to himself or to others? So he'll be meeting with this person virtually. He'll be sitting in his palace in Mar-a-Lago. The probation officer will be sitting in an office in New York City, and they will have this meeting virtually. I think they said via phone, like a conference call or something. I guess they didn't have Zoom yet in the Department of Probation in New York City, or Donald doesn't want to be on Zoom in this meeting because he's worried it might leak out. But, can we contrast this by the fact that Joe Biden was in Europe celebrating our triumph over the fascists in World War II, honoring those who served 80 years ago, storming the beaches of Normandy? Can we contrast the two speeches that were given? And then could we ask ourselves, why is this even still a thing? Why is Donald Trump still a thing? How is it that there is a major party in this country and frankly, millions of people, I keep saying frankly, I got to stop saying it, millions of people who still support this man? He was found guilty of covering up his sexual relationship with a porn star in an effort to win an election. Election interference, if you will. He was found guilty of trying to rig the game, something he always talks about, right? And he is clearly not mentally all there. It's very clear. You look at his interviews, you see Sean Hannity giving him these softball questions, and he can't even grab the softball question. He can't even hit him. I don't know where this ends. I mean, this can't be tolerated. It's not normal. We got to get back to normal. All right, I'm going to get back to normal. I've got a great interview on the other side of the break. Jill WIne-Banks, stay where you're at. Jill WIne-Banks is joining me. She is one of the co-hosts of Sisters-in-Law, and of course, you know her as a former Watergate prosecutor. Jill, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Hashtag Sisters-in-Law just won the Oscars of podcasts. It's called a Webby, and it was for the best news and politics podcast.
And let me
really excited.
And let me just say to the producers of the Aggressive Progressive podcast, where is my nomination for Webby? Can you all please just make sure that happens? I'm not going to call you. You listen to my pod, so put it in, make it happen. So Jill, it's been a while, and I said to myself, I need a legal mind to walk me through the vastness of the Trump indictments and his conviction in New York. Jill, first impressions of New York. Tell me what your thoughts are.
Well, I think that the justice was done in the New York trial, where he was convicted on 34 felony counts by a jury of his peers, and that he will be sentenced on July 11th, just before he's nominated at the Republican convention to be their nominee as a convicted, sentenced felon.
Yeah.
So that says a lot about what the Republican Party has become, which is this cult around his personality, who believe nothing of the true facts. They believe whatever he says. They don't care.
Yeah, and they have no shame either. Remember back in the day when politicians had shame? They would leave when they got caught?
Yes, I can think of one in particular.
Yeah, you were there.
Nixon. I was there.
Yeah.
He understood that he had been caught, that the evidence was clear, and he resigned rather than be impeached and convicted. And so that's where we're at. In today's world, that will never happen. There will never be an impeachment and conviction unless the other party has enough votes.
Right.
The same party, the Republican Party, as it used to be, did this. It was Republicans who went to Richard Nixon and said, I have seen the evidence, and you will be convicted by us if you don't resign. And that's why he resigned. Plus, he actually believed in facts, and he also believed in the rule of law.
Yeah.
And so he left. He left in shame, but he left.
He left rather than tear the country apart with the impeachment process, which is probably what would have happened. Donald Trump doesn't care about tearing the country apart because Donald Trump only cares about Donald Trump. Big question everybody's asking me, and I say no, but I want to know what you think. Is Trump going to go to jail for this?
Well, nobody knows the answer to that. We will have to wait and see. July 11th is not that far off. It's a month away. And so we'll know. But he certainly could. The crimes that he's convicted of carry jail time. Other people convicted of this crime have gone to jail, including Martha Stewart, a pretty famous person. And so he could go to jail. And the former Attorney General, Eric Holder, said the federal system could certainly manage to incarcerate him and protect him. I assume that New York can do the same.
Yeah.
I haven't heard anyone say that, but I cannot believe that the state of New York cannot do that. They can.
I don't think they're going to put him in Gen Pop at Rikers Island.
No, I would say that no one wants to see that. But incarceration has to be more. If he's confined to home confinement, it has to mean confinement. It doesn't mean that he can walk out in his backyard and play a round of golf.
Right.
It doesn't mean he can go into the ballroom and give an extemporaneous speech. That cannot be what incarceration means. Home confinement has to mean actual confinement. So as long as he's confined, and he can't be allowed to continue to lie to the American public and to downgrade and destroy our system of justice and the rule of law. That I think there has to be, and the gag order is right now something that is under consideration. He's asked that the gag order be lifted on the grounds that, well, there's no trial now, so he doesn't have to be quiet. There's still a system of justice that needs to be protected. The jury needs to be protected, and the only way to protect them is to not let him speak on social media platforms or on television stations.
Do you think that there's a possibility that they will recommend a prison sentence, but then the judge say it is suspended, pending good behavior or something like that? Put some restrictions around him so that he does all these things we talked about. Because, if he did get sentenced to jail, as a first-time convictor, he's not going to go to jail for a very long time. It seems to me that it might be better off if the judge said, no, we're going to suspend the sentence for a year or two, pending good behavior.
That is certainly a possibility, but incarceration for, even if it's a few months, would teach him a lesson that he's never learned. If Richard Nixon had not resigned, or if we had been able to indict him after he resigned, maybe there would be a big difference in how Donald Trump behaved. Maybe he would have really gotten the message that this could happen to me. And maybe he would have behaved better.
Right.
Not sure that he's capable of behaving better, but maybe.
So you're a better lawyer than me, and I've been trying to explain to people why this is a serious crime, right? Why what he did warranted felony charges. Can you do a better job of explaining that than I can? Can you tell my listeners why this was a felony?
Well, I always find you very articulate and persuasive and compelling, so I don't know that I can do it better, but I will certainly try to explain it now. And I would say, first of all, it starts out as a misdemeanor when you enter a false record. And that's very important, especially in New York, where Wall Street depends on honest records.
Yep.
So it's very important that records not be falsified. And it gets to be a felony if you falsify to conceal something else. And in this case, I hate when people call this the hush money case.
Yeah.
Or the Stormy Daniels case. This is an election interference case. The reason that he did this was to interfere in the knowledge that voters had in order to make a decision about who they would vote for. He knew, based on all evidence, that if it came out that he had paid off a porn star who he had slept with while his wife was pregnant.
Well, right after she gave birth.
Right, you're right. Right after she gave birth, that it would have hurt him in the election. And so he didn't want that to come out because it had just come out that he made a statement that was, I'm a star, so I can grab women by the what. And so women were already appalled. I thought when he said that, that was the end of his campaign.
It was until James Comey came out. His campaign was over, and then James Comey saved him.
Yeah, shame on him.
Yep.
But so this was really a total election interference. It was intended, and it did involve getting money that was not permissible under the federal election laws. I'm sorry, under the state election laws, and under the federal as well. That you cannot get that much money from one person and have it be legal. And this was how he was getting, and he was taking a tax deduction for a business expense on his business records. And it wasn't a business expense. It was totally a personal expense.
Yeah.
So he falsified, tax records as well as violating campaign laws. And that makes it a felony. And it is what it is. And if you don't like the law, then lobby your senators in the state of New York to change the law. But that's what the law is, and he violated it.
Yeah.
And he knew he was violating it. It's not like it just accidentally happened. It didn't.
And people do go to jail for this all the time.
Exactly.
And, like you said, Martha Stewart went to jail for this. And look, Jill, I'm a big believer that, everybody's like, oh, nobody else. No, look, he's running for president of the United States. I think that they should be held to a higher standard, not a lower standard. I think we see this going on right now with Hunter Biden on trial. Well, he's the president's son, and we can't just, look the other way because it's the president's son. We got to do what needs to be done. Jill, you were going to say something about Michael Cohen.
Well, just to emphasize that he pled guilty and served a long sentence for the very crime that Donald Trump has now been found guilty.
Yeah.
So
lost his law license.
Exactly. And there's no reason why the top guy gets off, and the people who did it for him go to jail.
I think that's the basic point here that I always try to make, is that somebody already went to jail for this, and it wasn't the guy who told him to do it. It wasn't the guy who benefited from it.
Exactly.
So
very good point.
All right. So Steve Bannon's going to jail, and my first thought was, I feel so bad for the guy who's got a room with him. That was my first thought. I never get happy when people go to jail. It's not something that makes me happy, but I am not sad to see him go to jail. The guy was in contempt of Congress. Why did it take so long for the courts to put him in the slammer?
Well, it is part of our legal system that everyone has a right to appeal, and he's still appealing, but not appealing to me, but he is appealing to conviction.
Yes. I don't think he's appealing to anybody.
I don't. Well, apparently he is to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
But I think that everyone has the right to appeal, and appeals take a long time to have oral arguments, to have briefing, to have decisions. What's interesting here is that despite it still being on appeal, the court said, no, you go to jail now. Report by July 1st.
Right.
So he is going to go to jail, even though his case is pending. And in a way, when you're pending, unless there is absolutely no chance that you will prevail, which is the case here, people don't go to jail because why would they serve time if they were going to eventually, have their conviction overturned for legal reasons? Here, the court has said, well, there's not much chance you're going to get off of this, so you might as well start serving your jail time. And so he is going to jail.
And I keep, and by the way, he'd be in jail right now, but for Donald Trump pardoning him for his, We Build the Wall scam, I should say.
Yeah. Definite scam.
Yeah.
That is unconscionable.
Well, I was saying earlier in the show, this is, the reason why Trump pardoned him for his scam is because Trump's running 5 or 6 scams too. So, and he wouldn't be able to be running these scams but for Steve Bannon helping him get elected president. It is, right. It's just bizarre to me that this is like, it goes to the whole notion that people like to say, it is easier to fool somebody than to convince them they have been fooled. And these guys have been bamboozling, people all across this country for the last 8 years, and you can't talk them out of it.
Yeah. They are doing exactly what they want to be true, even though the evidence all shows that they've been fooled. And, Richard Nixon got pardoned by Gerald Ford, who succeeded him as president when he resigned. And Gerald Ford did not win re-election in large part because he pardoned Nixon.
Right.
He said he was doing it to put this ugly segment of our history, behind us. But people felt that they should have had a trial, that they should have seen the evidence. And that's what should happen here, too.
Some people have been arguing with me. I'm of the legal mindset that accepting a pardon is an admission of guilt. And people have been saying, well, Kathy Hochul should pardon Donald Trump here in New York. And I'm like, well, he's never going to accept that he was guilty.
You are 100% correct, at least at the federal level. I have not researched New York law, although I am a member of the New York Bar. But at the federal level, the Supreme Court has said that if you accept a pardon, you have to do it after admitting that you are guilty.
Right.
And when Gerald Ford offered the pardon to Nixon, he sent a young lawyer. Nixon was then at San Clemente in California, where he left after the White House. And this young lawyer named Betten Becker had to give Nixon, who was, of course, a lawyer, a copy of the case that said accepting a pardon is admitting guilt. And I've been on a panel with Benton a long time ago, and he described it as a very touching, emotional moment. Very sad.
Yeah. I can't imagine being former president of the United States having to do that. But in New York State, I don't believe the governor can simply pardon you. I think you need to ask the governor to pardon you in New York. I think that's another wrinkle here. It was like, oh, she should just do it. It would be politically, it would be good for her. It would take away his, and I get it. It would take away his victim argument for about an hour, because then he'd find another victim argument, because that's the only argument he knows how to make. But
do you think it would help her politically?
No, I don't think so.
What I've just said about Ford being not reelected?
No, I don't think it would help her at all. New York State is a, 3-1 Democratic state, and Democrats think the guy should be in jail. He should be in jail for a lot of things. And, just like Al Capone, they got him on this. He did do it. It's not like he didn't do it. He did it. And we could talk about, whether or not this case should be brought or not, but it was brought, and a jury of 12 picked by his own attorneys. They had 5 preemptory challenges left that they did not use. Convicted him in an hour, basically, in a couple of hours. They asked for the instructions to be read back, and then they convicted the guy. I mean, it does. How do you just push? You can't brush that aside in America.
You shouldn't be able to, but again, that's what all the Republicans in Congress are doing, and certainly all the Republicans being considered to be the vice presidential running mate, Donald Trump. And that is shameful. And there are a lot of Republicans in Congress who were in Congress on January 6th that should have been co-conspirator indictees.
Yeah.
And they aren't.
Yeah, I don't like the fact that there has been no consequences for the people who actually made this happen of January 6th. It's horrible.
Exactly.
I'm talking with Jill WIne-Banks. Don't forget to download the Sisters-in-Law podcast, Webby winner, by the way, which I am not, but she is a Webby winner, and I'm happy to have her on here, and she deserves it because it's a great podcast. Download it wherever you get your podcasts. Jill, when I was going to law school, I used to think of the Supreme Court almost like the gods on Mount Olympus. They were like untouchable. They were coming down with like rulings from on high, and they were these legal scholars that wore robes all day and scratched their long beards. And now I'm like looking at these guys getting into fights with their neighbors. I mean, the woman was on TV. The woman was on TV that he fought with. She couldn't be more than 35 years old. How is a justice of the United States Supreme Court getting into a shouting match on his lawn with his next door neighbor, and that is not, that's not normal.
And none of the behavior of the justices, or at least some of the justices, is explainable now. I, like you, thought that they were almost infallible. Yes, they had made a mistake in, some of their early racial decisions.
Of course.
But they had corrected them. And I never expected them to then uncorrect them, make them wrong again.
Right.
But they are showing, even things like gerrymandering, that, well, it's okay to do political even if it overlaps with racial. It's not racial because it's political.
Right.
And political is okay. Well, political shouldn't be okay. This is supposed to be a fair system. But what's going on with both Thomas and Alito is so repulsive. And I'm now finding myself saying, well, isn't there somewhere higher up that we could go to get fairness and quality in the decisions? And the answer is no.
Well, no, the answer is yes. It's the voters.
Well, but that's not going to change the court right now.
Well, if the voters put in people who want to change the courts,
yes,
then the courts can be changed.
These 9 people have a lifetime appointment.
Right.
And no matter what changes they make, these 9 people are there for the foreseeable future. So we have to deal with setting up some sort of ethics code that is enforceable outside of the court.
Right.
So that people can at least be required to recuse in a case where there is an obvious appearance of impropriety.
Now, don't you think that would be a bipartisan issue, like where people could just say, yeah, this makes sense?
Yes, it should be. And I remember when there was bipartisanship, where Democrats and Republicans dined together, had conversations, and they had agreements. They, compromised. That was considered a good thing, not a dirty, bad thing.
Right.
We aren't there anymore. And so, could there be an impeachment of Alito for what he's done? And I think it's important to talk about not just that he had these 2 flags flying over 2 of his houses.
Right.
But that he's lying to Congress. He wrote a letter that has been proven to be false. There's now discovered evidence that he's lying, that he said something happened that didn't happen until after the flag flying.
It was 2 months later.
Right. So he's lied to Congress. Isn't that an impeachable offense?
I think it is.
Isn't that a criminal offense?
Isn't Steve Bannon, we just talked about Steve Bannon, isn't he going to jail for not, people, I don't get it.
It's incomprehensible to me that he can get away with that and that he isn't forced by his colleagues to at least step away from the January 6th decisions, including the immunity, which is unconscionably delayed by the Supreme Court.
Yeah, probably by him.
By all of them. There were enough of them to delay it. Excuse me, I have a bad cold and I'm about to cough.
Oh, don't worry about it. I got you.
They didn't hear arguments until April 25th. The case was already fully briefed to the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. There was no need to delay for the briefing.
None.
And in past cases of national significance, like Bush v. Gore, like Nixon, U.S. v. Nixon,
right,
they decided within a few days. They didn't wait. This is argued April 25th, and now it is almost June 25th. Why are they waiting this long? Are they going to wait till the very last decision?
Yeah, it's going to be the last decision.
That there's no criminal trial.
Here's the thing. It appears to me they're going to set up some sort of test to see whether this was within the duties of the president or not. Wouldn't that leave room for the district court to actually have an evidentiary hearing about everything that happened on January 6th? So you almost will have a mini trial in sometime in September.
I immediately tweeted that this isn't all bad. If they don't do the unthinkable and say he has absolute immunity for everything, if they say, well, it has to be within the ambit of his constitutional responsibilities, mandatory, not, judgmental, but things that he has to do that are ministerial. if they say that it has to be determined whether this is within the outer parameters of his constitutional responsibilities, and they send it back to the district court for a hearing on whether the things alleged are his duties.
Right.
First of all, any court should take judicial notice of the fact that they are not, that the president has no role in overseeing a state-run election. And the states control federal elections.
Right.
That's the responsibility. So they should be able to take judicial notice and just get rid of it, dismiss it immediately. But if Judge Chutkan has a hearing, a lot of the evidence will be before the people. And unfortunately, there won't be cameras in the courtroom. One of my current favorite passions is to argue for cameras in the courtroom.
Yeah, could you imagine if we would have had cameras in the courtroom in New York? It would have been must-see TV.
So much, but this would be even more so. This would be people would be taking off work to stay home to watch the trial.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important. You can look at the George Floyd murder case, and Derek Chauvin got convicted, and people accepted it because they saw the witnesses. They heard their testimony, but they saw their demeanor. They saw their body language, and they believed certain witnesses and disbelieved others. And that led to a very peaceful acceptance of the conviction of Derek Chauvin, the police officer who killed George Floyd. And it would be true, and we saw it actually in Georgia when there were arguments in Georgia which allows cameras.
Yeah.
We saw, and you could judge Bonnie Willis's testimony. You could judge her father, who was an amazing witness.
Yeah.
And I think it makes a big difference.
And I think we all think that the judge kind of made the right call. He kind of split the baby.
Yes.
You know, I mean, like, we're not removing her, but you got to get rid of this guy.
Yeah, I'm not even sure that was necessary, honestly, because I believe that whatever their relationship did nothing to the guilt or innocence.
No, I get that.
That was accrued.
I get that, but it was the appearance of that impropriety that was the problem, right? Which
compared to the appearance of impropriety of Alito and
nothing compared to that. But this is what surprised me. So the Chief Justice sends a letter, responding to Congress saying, Congress's call for an ethics, the Senate's call for, a code of ethics, and maybe the Senate should pass one if the court's not going to do it on its own, a real one with real teeth. And all 9 of them signed it. The liberals signed it too. They signed the letter from the Chief Justice saying, no, we've got this. You're not allowed to do this.
Yeah, I'm not going to even hazard a guess on why the 3 liberal justices signed that, or why Roberts penned it, or why Amy Coney Barrett signed it. $10 million.
I
understand.
Thomas got, in the last 5 years, over $2 million in gifts that we know about. Right? I mean, compare that to even any of the other ones. It's like hundreds of dollars here and there from people. Right? That they reported. I don't know how this is allowed. I mean, if a member of Congress was getting millions of dollars in gifts from somebody, there would be a full-blown, trial over it.
Well, I believe that Senator Menendez is on trial for getting gifts of that proportion. Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, and rightfully so, by the way. Rightfully so, he's on trial for that. And it would be rightfully so to try. I mean, Clarence Thomas the Supreme Court has become basically a legislature that writes long opinions, right? I mean, that's really what they are. And it's just sad to me, again, studying law in the late 90s and thinking about the Supreme Court all the time for 3 years, because you are. I mean, it's what you do.
You are, absolutely.
And now seeing what it's become and seeing how they just throw out precedents like they did in the Dobbs decision, throwing out Roe v. Wade. I mean, I remember learning about Roe v. Wade in law school and how Roe v. Wade came. And you go way back to Loving v. Virginia, Griswold v. Connecticut, which is, by the way, they're calling to throw that out too. It's just amazing to me that this is what they've become.
Contraceptives for Americans. And that affects men and women.
Yeah.
If men don't want to be fathers and women don't want to be mothers and you can't get an abortion, the only thing you can do is stop the pregnancy.
Yeah.
And, hey, women, all I'm saying is just tell your men no more sex until you get us a contraceptive approval from Congress.
I don't think that everybody, look, I know that for me, I don't want to have a child every time I have sex. Just,
right.
I mean, I like my kids, don't get me wrong, but I don't want more of them. It's
right.
like, it's just,
exactly.
It's just the way it is. And I think if we leave it to these people on the Supreme Court, we're going to be in that spot sooner rather than later. Which is why I think, the election of 2024 is very important for a variety of reasons, not just Trump's potential damage, but the long-term damage that his appointees on the court can do. Jill.
And also at the state level.
Yeah.
Because states have a lot more power than people realize, and it's very important for people to vote down ballot for state judges, for state senators, for state representatives, for the local officials in their community, whether it's the Board of Education or whether it's for the governor. Those are as important as the president.
I agree. All right, Jill, I told you this would go fast. We're out of time. Anything you want to plug?
Hashtag Sisters-in-Law, my book, The Watergate Girl, my fight for truth and justice against a criminal president, not named Trump, but named Nixon in the case of that. I would say, and also, of course, I'm on MSNBC, so I've got to plug MSNBC.
Check her out. Jill WIne-Banks, thanks for joining me. We'll have you back again real soon. All right, America, stick around. Listen to this. I'll be right back. I'm finding it hard to believe Trump's fundraising numbers. Now, if they're real, he had a great week. Almost worth being convicted of a felony involving the sex you covered up with a porn star that you had days after your wife gave birth. And I'll always refer to it like that because I just want to remind people who are being complete hypocrites that they're being complete hypocrites. But I find it hard to believe he's not exaggerating. Now, I'm sure he raised a lot of money after that verdict. I'm sure of it. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. His base would go nuts, and they're saying 30% of his donors, small dollar donors, are first-time donors. I don't believe that either. I just don't think that being convicted of a felony gets you new supporters. But that's what he wants us to think, right? He wants us to think that he's got all this money that came in because of this, and he's a martyr, just like Jesus, because that's what he was comparing himself to over the weekend. He's just like Jesus, and when you martyr him, more people follow him, right? That's the whole play. That's his whole fetish, I guess. I don't know. Maybe Stormy will disagree. I just don't believe him, and I won't believe it till I see it, right? The Trump campaign has been closing their outreach centers in swing states. The Biden campaign has been opening outreach centers in swing states. See, that's how you judge if a campaign is properly funded and properly run. I for one, think that he's not properly run and they're diverting money to Trump's own personal problems, whether it be his lawsuits, and I'm not just talking about the felony in New York, but there were some civil suits that he lost that money has been going to defend him in those cases. There's the election interference cases for January 6th, and there's the Georgia cases. All that money for all these lawyers all over the country. Little old ladies giving $5 on the internet, maybe monthly, and they don't even know it. All going to him, not to run a campaign, not to make him president of the United States. To defend him from things he actually did. And now he's supposed to be a billionaire. Even if these things are costing a couple $100 million, he's a billion. He's supposed to be worth $10 billion. $10 billion is a lot of money. I mean, $10 billion would raise you a couple $100 million a year just in interest, maybe more, maybe almost $1 billion a year in interest. Maybe he's not as rich as he says either, right? The man was just convicted on 34 felonies stemming from his, poor handling of business records, right? Or, misappropriating business records lying on business forms submitted to the state of New York, tax forms. Of course, they all stem from paying off a porn star he had sex with days after his wife gave birth, just for the record. So now he's just going to lie about this too. Like, why would we think it's real? I've been asked about these fundraising numbers in a couple of outlets, a paper that constantly calls me and that I enjoy giving quotes for, and on News Nation, on the radio. People are asking me about, his fundraising haul. Oh, my God. I don't believe it. I haven't really said it till I just said it here. Because if it's true, it's great. I mean, it's great news. Money is the mother's milk of politics. You can't really get anywhere without it. But do you really think that 30% of these donors, you think that, so he's basically saying he raised $150 million in the month of May. 60 million of it since the verdict. And of that 60 million, 30% were brand new donors. So 30% of 60 million is about $18 million. Let's call it 20. Do you think that $20 million was given to Donald Trump by people who've never given to Donald Trump before because he was convicted of this felony? I find that really hard to believe. Really hard. I'm not saying no new donors came to him. I'm sure there might be a couple of dyed-in-the-wool Republicans who've never given before who decided that now is my time, I've got to give to my guy. I could see that. But not $20 million in 2 days from a guy who wasn't raising any real money most of the year. Just don't believe that's the case. And even if it is the case, let's say he really did raise this money, he's going to waste it anyway. He's going to buy hats, stupid ads. But really, when elections are won by a couple of hundred, a couple of thousand votes in a couple states, you need a ground game. And it might be a little too late to get one. All right, I think you've all had enough of me for one day. So I'm going to remind you now, as I always do, to seek the truth. Question everyone and everything, even me. Seek the truth. I know it's out there, and I know you'll find it if you look for it. And I'll be back here again next week to tell you the truth as I see it. I'm Chris Hahn. Thanks for listening to the Aggressive Progressive Podcast.